Welcome back to our news bulletin. We start from Indian-occupied Kashmir, where Indian troops have martyred 4 more civilians in Anantnag district. The occupation forces have killed 39 people in the valley in the last 2 months. The civilians were martyred during a search operation in Watergam area of the district. The troops sealed all entry points of Watrigam, Achabal and Islamabad districts during door-to-door search operations. The valley has been reeling under Indian curfew and communications blackout for the last 224 days. Meanwhile, in India, the support for Anti-Citizenship Act protesters has increased in Lucknow city of Uttar Pradesh state. The development comes after the UP government put up posters across the city revealing identities of demonstrators. The common people have written "I support you" messages on the banners and billboards of the activists. Meanwhile, a group of civil rights activists has urged Delhi government to enhance compensation for victims of violence. The group has asked the government to include individuals who faced sexual violence in the list of rights victims. 83 people, mostly Muslims, have been killed in the protests against the citizenship law in the last 3 months. Moving on to Afghanistan, where opposition parties have agreed to form a council for the peace process in the country. Politicians, including Abdullah, Bulletin, Hikmatyar and Hamid Karzai, met at the home of High Peace Council head Karim Khalili. During the meeting, attendees agreed council is the only way to address challenges in the peace process. In a statement, the politicians said, absence of such council will give the Taliban an upper hand in intra-Afghan talks. It said the dialogue with the Taliban must be started as soon as possible and the body should be set up to decide on the negotiation team. The Kabul government has not yet responded to the proposal. The government said it will announce a list of consulting bodies and a negotiation team after the Taliban enter direct talks with the government. Meanwhile, U.S. Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad has called on Afghan President Ashraf Ghani to discuss the country's issues. Presidential Palace spokesperson Sadiq Siddiqui said both discussed the latest development in the Afghan peace process. Siddiqui said the two sides also discussed the reduction in violence and the future steps in the process. Meanwhile, Taliban have said international and domestic power must understand the new reality after the Doha Agreement. In a statement, the group said, all powers have come around the idea which fighters have been stressing since the start. The tensions in the war-torn country are high between Kabul and the Taliban over prisoner swap under the Doha peace deal. France has announced to impose strict restrictions in the country to combat the new coronavirus pandemic. Prime Minister Edouard Philippe says the government will close all restaurants, cafes, theaters and non-essential shops from today. This report has further details.
Over 400 people have died globally from the new coronavirus in the last 24 hours, igniting a new wave of fear. France has announced the closure of all non-essential public places. Prime Minister Edouard Philippe has urged people to step up efforts and work together to combat the deadly disease.
Nous devons tous ensemble.
I say this in all seriousness. We must all together show more discipline in the application of these measures. We need to do at the moment is straightforward. Avoid gathering as much as possible, limit friendly and family reunions. Only use public transportation to go to work and only if a physical presence is required. Only leave your house to get essential groceries, exercise or vote.
Que pour aller au travail.
The Spanish government has also declared a 15-day national lockdown from Monday to battle the pandemic. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez's wife, Begoña Gómez, has tested positive for the virus. The World Health Organization says almost 10,000 cases have been confirmed outside China in a day. It said additional 13 countries have reported infection cases, lifting the number of affected countries and regions to 135.
Any country that looks at the experience of other countries with large epidemics and thinks that won't happen to us is making a deadly mistake. It can happen to any country.
Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has tested negative for the coronavirus after rumors spread that he came into contact with a patient.
However, as the coronavirus continues to spread with fears mounting, countries with the most cases are reporting more recoveries than new infections. This has given a ray of hope. The disease may be curable and not necessarily fatal. In China's Hubei province, over 54,000 people have recovered since the outbreak, with only 4 cases reported in Wuhan city in the past 24 hours. South Korea says it has 76 new cases, while 120 people have been discharged from hospital after recovering. This is the 3rd day in a row that South Korea has reported more recoveries than new infections. Similarly, around the world, a total of 73,966 patients of COVID-19 have shaken off the illness. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has advised people to follow safety instructions issued by the government. He said there is a need for caution but not panic. Moreover, South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation leaders will hold a video conference today over coronavirus pandemic. The conference is being held after Pakistan agreed to participate in the moot over Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's appeal. In a tweet, Modi said coming together of regional states will lead to effective outcomes and benefits to the citizens. Special Assistant to the Prime Minister on Health, Zafar Mirza, will take part in the conference to represent Pakistan. Earlier, Pakistan's Foreign Ministry said the threat of COVID-19 requires coordinated efforts at the global and regional levels. South Asia is on the edge after an increase in virus cases, with 102 in India, 31 in Pakistan, and 23 infections in the other 3 states. In France, voting has begun in the first round of local elections amid coronavirus outbreak, which has claimed 80 lives in the country so far. Over 47 million people are set to vote in today's polls. Almost 35,000 municipalities will elect their mayors, including Paris, which is the country's most high-profile job in local government. The second round of elections will be held on 22nd March. French election officials say they are taking a series of measures to curb the pandemic on election day.
We
set up the voting precinct in a certain way to fight the coronavirus, especially by changing the direction of the voting booth to limit the holding of the curtain, which is supposed to keep votes confidential. We reoriented the voting booth entrances towards the wall. That way, voters can go into the voting booth without having to close the curtain, touch it, or reopen it.
Russia's President Vladimir Putin has signed off constitutional reforms that allow him to run for 2 more terms as president. In a statement, Kremlin said the lower and upper houses and all regional parliaments have approved the changes, which now have been sent to the Constitutional Court. The court must now rule whether changes are legal ahead of a planned nationwide vote on the reforms on April 22nd. Kremlin says the vote may be initiated over the internet due to coronavirus, which the opposition has criticized as a sure way to falsify the result. The amendments change the balance of power by increasing the role of the State Council advisory body. They also give both Parliament and the President additional instruments of authority. Putin proposed to change the constitution in January, but continued to deny that he is seeking an extension. The North American Aerospace Defense Command says it has intercepted 2 pairs of Russian military reconnaissance aircraft near northwestern Alaska state. In a statement, the joint U.S.-Canadian command said the Russian aircraft remained in the air defense identification zone for hours. The command said the Russian jets never entered the sovereign airspace of the U.S. or Canada. The aircraft strolled in the vicinity of the U.S. Navy's exercise in the Arctic Ocean. The Navy is conducting submarine exercises in the ocean. Turkish and Russian troops will begin joint patrolling at a key highway in northwest Syria today. The exercise was decided in the ceasefire agreement reached in Moscow on 5th March. Turkish Foreign Ministry announced the development after two sides ended 4 days of talks in Ankara over the technicalities of the ceasefire. Talking to media, Foreign Minister Hulusi Akar said Ankara's hopes for the truce rapidly becomes a permanent one. Syria's conflict has entered its 10th year, with Bashar al-Assad's government consolidating its hold over the country. In the last 9 years, 384,000 people have died, including over 116,000 civilians, with 11 million people displaced. Turkey says it has killed 3 militants of the Kurdistan Workers' Party in 2 separate operations in northern Syria. The Defense Ministry says 2 militants were killed in Operation Peace Spring, while another targeted in Euphrates Shield. The ministry said it will not stop the operations against militants in the region. Since 2016, Turkey has launched a trio of operations across its border into northern Syria. Ankara holds the fighter group responsible for the deaths of some 40,000 people in a 30-year conflict. Syria's war has entered its 10th year today, leaving over 380,000 dead. The conflict has involved many regional and international players, creating millions of refugees and displaced people. After 4 decades of President Bashar al-Assad's rule, protests broke out in March 2011 for a political change. The anti-government protests soon turned into a complex war entangling rebels and external forces. Gaining military support from Russia, Iran, and Lebanon's Hezbollah, Assad got back the control of over 70% of Syria. In October last year, Turkey launched Operation Peace Spring to clear the border area of terrorists and establish a 30 kilometers long buffer zone in Syria's north. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's corruption trial has been delayed for 2 months due to the coronavirus crisis in the country. The Justice Ministry says the trial, which was set for March 17th, will now begin on May 24th. Earlier this week, a country rejected Netanyahu's plea to delay the start of his corruption trial. The judge ruled there was no justification for a delay. Netanyahu has been charged with fraud, breach of trust, and accepting bribes in connection with a series of corruption scandals. Netanyahu is the first Israeli prime minister to be indicted while in office. New Zealand is marking the grim first anniversary of the Christchurch mosque massacre that killed 51 people. While coronavirus concerns led to the cancelling of an official remembrance service, a crowd still gathered to honor the dead. This report has details.
Today marks the first anniversary of the deadliest mass shooting that claimed 51 lives and wounded dozens of others. A white supremacist gunman carried out the attacks at 2 mosques targeting Muslims attending Friday prayers. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern admits there is much more her country and the world leaders can do to tackle white supremacists.
Leaders now have a stage that is amplified beyond the domestic, and that because of that we all have a responsibility. We all have a choice. We either promote ideas of inclusivity and are careful never to blame groups when we have challenges domestically, or we don't. But my call on leaders is to remember that your words travel, your sentiment travels. There are no borders anymore, and the impact of what you say can impact my nation as much as your own.
Cancelling the service, Ardern said a precautionary approach is needed as 6 cases of COVID-19 have been reported in the country. But on Friday, thousands of Muslims gathered at the Al-Noor and Linwood mosques to hold combined services for the victims. They said it was important to share the sorrow and hardship and keep the memory of the dead alive.
I came here to support my Muslim brothers and sisters here, to share with them the sorrow and the hardship that they've been through.
The mosque attacker Brenton Tarrant, an Australian national, is due to go on trial on 2nd of June, facing terrorism charges plus 51 counts of murder.
Earthworms are probably one of the last things you could ever imagine eating. But when Latvian scientist says the creepy, slimy creatures are an excellent source of protein. They are cheap, and unlike more mainstream sources of protein, they have no carbon footprint. Details in this protein-packed report.
Most people would probably rather eat a burger or steak than earthworms. But food science researcher Indra Gedrowitsa says you should give them another chance. She says earthworms have just as much protein as beef or chicken and up to 3 times as much when dry.
If we look at the nutrient quality, earthworms are rich in protein. In fact, when they are fresh, they are equivalent to the meat we are using. But when dried, they are 3 times as rich in protein as meat and other sources.
A single cow produces between 70 and 120 kilograms of methane a year, making the cattle industry one of the world's leading causes of global warming. In comparison, the amount of greenhouse gases produced by earthworms is almost nil. But whether people are ready to overcome cultural constraints and actually eat them is a different story altogether.
This is a way to slowly make people accustomed to something so unusual, because to immediately and completely replace the usual protein sources that come from meat with earthworms is unacceptable for people. The products they use on a daily basis are more likely to continue to be used, even if one of the raw materials is so unusual and it could be more easily accepted.
There is also other work that needs to be done. Jedrowitsa says more research is needed to make earthworms safer for people to eat. Until then, it is probably best to stick to chicken.
In Turkey, a music teacher is grabbing his students' attention by creating musical instruments from vegetables. His inventions include a flute carved from a radish and an ocarina made from a potato. This report will now tell you more.
Shaping musical instruments from perishable items is an innovative and unique idea. This Turkish music teacher uses carrots, potatoes, radish, broccoli, and celery roots to make small musical instruments. Volkan Yaran says this is an interesting way to encourage his students to enjoy music.
My students showed great interest in this carrot flute. Almost every day, several students bought carrots to me, asking if I could make flutes for them. They wanted to hear the carrot sound.
Yaran uses an electric drill to make holes in vegetables, enabling them to produce musical sounds.
My aim was to show the students that music is everywhere in nature, so they could better feel the music.
This activity has made Yaran's class a favorite among students.
This is what children love, especially the fries. I made an ocarina out of a potato. Here is the real ocarina, and here is the potato ocarina.
Yaran has had an interest in music since childhood and wants his students to love the art as much as he does.
UAE and Saudi Arabia central banks have announced to inject over $40 billion stimulus plans to ease economic impact of coronavirus outbreak in their countries. UAE central bank announced $27 billion economic plan to support commercial banks and businesses in the country, whereas Saudi Arabia's monetary authority said it had prepared over $13 billion package to help small and medium-sized enterprises. Saudi funding aims to grant SMEs 6-month deferrals on bank payments, concessional financing, and exemptions from the costs of a loan guarantee program. Saudi Arabia and UAE are expected to face wider fiscal deficits this year due to slump in oil prices. Oil giant Saudi Aramco has posted a 21% decline in 2019 net profit due to a drop in oil prices and production. In a statement, Aramco CEO Amin Nasser says the oil giant has taken steps to rationalize planned capital spending in 2020 following the coronavirus outbreak. Aramco said company expects capital spending for this year to be between $25 billion to $30 billion. in light of current recent commodity price volatility. The company said it paid a dividend of over $73 billion in 2019 and intends to declare a cash dividend of $75 billion in 2020. This was Aramco's first earnings announcement after it listed in December in a record IPO that valued the company at $1.7 trillion. Last week, Aramco's share price fell below the original IPO price for the first time after oil prices crashed. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.